Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is John Tokar. I'm the chief of the Center for Cryptologic History here at the National Security Agency, and I welcome you to the 18th Cryptologic History Symposium. Whether this is your first symposium or your 18th, we are confident that the program we've designed has something you will find entertaining and educational. The lineup this year includes an amazing array of new topics as well as fresh takes on some familiar subjects. NSA is constantly engaged in exploring and examining ourselves in order to remain at the forefront of cryptology that encompasses both foreign signals intelligence and cybersecurity. We do this in order to support the defense of the nation and our allies. Similarly, the Center for Cryptologic History, or CCH, as we call ourselves, is always seeking new ways to provide objective, meaningful historical support. Effectively doing so can enhance decision-making as well as improve current and future operations. Equally important is our drive to advance an understanding of cryptologic history for internal and external audiences alike. By communicating this knowledge as transparently as possible,
Cutting off, thank you.
we hope to demonstrate our commitment to fostering public understanding of NSA's mission and heritage. This symposium represents the culmination of more than 2 years' worth of dedication and shared passion for cryptologic history, not just within CCH, but also from our contributors, our supporters, and our partners at the National Cryptologic Foundation. This pandemic has obviously forced us to host the symposium virtually this year, and thus we're not going to have the normal level of speaker to attendee engagement. But I'd ask you to bear with us if we experience a hiccup or two with the technology or an internet connection for a particular presenter. This is the largest event of its kind that the agency has undertaken, and we have people dialing in literally from around the globe. Last count, I was told we have 350 distinct registrants, which I believe is a new record. We have, and despite these, the virtual nature, you'll still be able to submit questions through our Q&A feature in Microsoft Teams. The questions you submit will be relayed to the speakers by the session moderators at the end of each session. And while the virtual setting doesn't allow us to distribute the usual amount of swag from the CCH Pubs table and the CWF store and or even the NCF book sale, I encourage you all to peruse the history website at nsa.gov. There is a tab on the upper right-hand side, where you can find digital versions of all our unclassified publications, to include our brand new issue of the Cryptologic Quarterly, NSA's professional journal. This just came out a couple weeks ago in digits, and it is available there now. It includes exciting new material from Liza Mundy and Dave Sherman, as well as current CCH historians Sarah Parsons, Jessica Garrett-Harsh, and Pat Baumgartner. You should be able to order print copies in the coming weeks. They're not available just yet, but you'll be able to order print copies like you order print copies of all our publications through the NSA history link at nsa.gov. Additionally, please be aware that CCH's visual historian, oh, by the way, we're going to post a link to that CQ edition in the chat, in the Q&A feature, if you haven't already seen it. Additionally, please be aware that CCH's visual historian Wade Forbes will be live sketchnoting some of our presentations, as he did in 2017. Sketchnoting, also referred to as visual note-taking, is a creative and graphic process that can document conversations with the use of illustrations, symbols, structures, and text. And by combining graphics with the traditional method of using text, the result is information that is captured and communicated visually and artistically. The link to where you can watch Wade while he is working will be posted in the Q&A for each session where that is taking place. And we'll be sharing all of Wade's sketchnoting after the symposium is over. Finally, I just want to extend my sincere thanks to all of our presenters, attendees, support staff, and our partners from the National Cryptologic Foundation. In particular, I want to thank CCH historian Sarah Parsons, who is actually producing this and many other sessions, This entire event simply does not happen without her dedication, hard work, and attention to detail, particularly as we attempt to execute this complex event virtually for the first time. Thanks again to everybody, and please enjoy the next few days. So without further ado, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Admiral Bobby R. Inman. Admiral Inman graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 1950 and was commissioned in the Naval Reserve in 1952. He served in a variety of operational assignments, but primarily held intelligence-related positions, including the Director of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and he became the Director of NSA in 1977. He then went on to be the Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1981 and retired from the Navy and government service in 1982 with the permanent rank of Admiral. After retirement from the Navy, he was Chairman and CEO of the Microelectronics and Computer Technology Corporation and Chairman, President, and CEO of Westmark Systems Incorporated. He became an adjunct professor at the University of Texas at Austin in 1987, appointed a tenured professor holding the Lyndon B. Johnson Centennial Chair in National Policy in 2001. Later, he was interim dean of the LBJ School of Public Affairs on 2 separate occasions and serves as a trustee of the California Institute of Technology. Most of you will remember that Admiral Inman was inducted into the Cryptologic Hall of Honor in 2017, making him at that time only the second Dernza to be so honored, the first being, of course, Lieutenant General Ralph Kanine. His Hall of Honor biography includes the following. He became director in '77, as I said, and over the next 4 years made profound changes in agency practices and culture. He oversaw major technological improvements to NSA operations, including overhead collection, remote collection, and signals processing. One of his most influential contributions was in the process changes for developing future leadership. Admiral Inman established a special committee to identify mid-level managers with ability and set policies on how they were to be prepared for future leadership roles. The methods he used formed the basis for today's leadership development process, and this led in part to his selection of Ann Care Christie to be the first female deputy director in 1980. Finally, his relationship with our external overseers in Congress and the White House was extraordinary. In particular, he was able to win over President Jimmy Carter, who entered office with some suspicion of the intelligence community. But he soon became an avid consumer of NSA reporting and remained in close contact with NSA until his last moments in office. Sir, with that introduction, we welcome you. We're very grateful that you took this opportunity to speak with us today, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir, we can.
We had a pretty exciting 25 minutes of getting Microsoft Team onto this laptop, but we're now here. And special appreciation to the gentleman in Sarah Parsons' office who walked this amateur through how to do that. So now we're here. All I see in front of me is my picture on the screen. I would note that I still had hair when that picture was taken, and it's 40 years old in the process. I first used the product produced by NSA when I became a briefer for the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Arleigh Burke, in the fall of 1958. 2 years of that, I went back to sea, and then I came to an office the Navy had at the National Security Agency, where I served for 3 years, tracking Soviet Navy beginning to operate international waters. From there, I went to Sweden. The Swedes had asked for help in analyzing what they were collecting on the Soviet Navy in the Baltic. 2.5 years. And from there, 4 years committed to the Vietnam conflict, still tracking the rest of the world. But it was in that era where I became intensely engaged in using NSA product for warning to protect reconnaissance missions, peripheral flights, combat operations, learning how you could provide, if you could provide almost direct feed out of what you were collecting, you could use the product for kinetic effect very effectively. From there, National War College, pulled out of intelligence, then to Assistant Chief Staff Intelligence Hawaii for 9 months, picked up early for a first star, came back to be Director of Naval Intelligence in September '74. Church and Pike Committee investigations were a pretty dramatic part of that 21 months. But out of all that, I got promoted to 3-star from 1, became the Vice Director of DIA for a year, and then the greatest assignment of my active duty time on 5 July 1977, I relieved General Llewellyn as the director. I had spent a good deal of my career up to that point in managing the careers of naval intelligence specialists, and had learned pretty early, if you are visibly active in helping people move their careers, you get their great loyalty in return. So 2 weeks into the NSA job, I put together a task force to tell me who the water walkers were in the GS-14, GS-15 levels. And I asked Ankara Christie, heading the Soviet problem, to chair it. They came back, grumbled a little at starting, but they came back after a couple of months with 81 names. And I dropped the other shoe. Within the next 3 months, I moved all 81 of those to new assignments. 78 of them were successes, only 3 ringers. From there, many of them moved on. Before I left, I moved into new jobs, and a couple of them became ultimately the deputy director of the agencies. Many leadership positions, obviously something about which I remain proud. But something else occurred. The first day I was in office, an employee in the research area, frustrated that General Allen had not acted to try to suppress cryptologic research in the academic world and the Bell Labs world, wrote a letter to the IEEE telling them that all those private research activities were in violation of the law. That was an assertion that would not withstand scrutiny, but it created a great stir about NSA suppressing of research activities in the private sector. I had, and the view inside NSA was that developing cryptography was an NSA monopoly, well-deserved, but critical for protecting sources and methods in collection. I decided I ought to hear what the other side thought. The new general counsel I'd hired had been an undergraduate at University of California, Berkeley, where he had been editor of the Daily Californian. And I concluded his credentials were sufficient that we'd be able to get in to have a dialogue at UC Berkeley. So then I went out. Let's just say that I had great difficulty establishing a dialogue with the head of the academic senate. But fortunately, the vice chancellor, Mike Heyman, had elected to come to the session. And he stopped everything and said, let's consider for a few minutes that the Admiral might have valid concerns. How would we deal with it? Interesting dialogue for an hour. But the general thrust was we needed to have a peer review process that the researchers would believe in, and that NSA would not use as a way to block research, but would give a rapid response. While I was there, I made the decision that I would also drive down to Palo Alto, California, to meet with another researcher at Stanford named Marty Hellman. I persuaded both the Berkeley crowd and Professor Hellman that I was serious about trying to establish a dialogue. They responded positively, and I found Jack Peltison, the head of the American Council on Education, would play host, and the head of the National Science Foundation would fund. So we began a dialogue. It produced a process that worked for 10 years and established credibility on both sides. In that process, to deal with the crisis, I made a speech to AFCEA, first time that a director of NSA had made a public speech. A lot of concerns inside the agency about this going public. Small incidental, like if you drove the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, there was a sign at Route 32 that indicated a defense installation. And I had that changed to say the National Security Agency. We did not need to try to obscure the reality that we existed. Now, that propelled me on a track of saying, how could we deal with public suspicion and rebuild confidence in the mission? I found as I went out to have visits to make speeches, the first question I got was, are you listening to my communications? That was the outcome of the Church and Pike Committee hearings. And it largely went to something called the Tom Charles Houston proposal, developed out of President Nixon's cadre, that would have collected against Vietnam protesters. It was never implemented, but nonetheless, it spread the image that NSA was collecting information on US citizens. So I found that was a challenge I had to deal with from the beginning in the process. And it led to a lot of interaction with the Congress, with other agencies, because in the reality, NSA cannot publicly defend its operations. It has to depend on the Congress as the representatives of the public to undertake that job. So I worked actively with the new select committees in the Senate and the House to have them fully informed on NSA's mission and operations, to welcome staffers. The committees had established security protocols, which provided confidence that we could share the detailed operations and not, in fact, damage sources and methods. It worked very effectively in my time frame, but that's because I had Senator Inouye, Senator Goldwater, Senator Bai, Senator Goldwater, and Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and on the House side, Congressman Eddie Bolin, who were effective workers. But I also was fortunate to get advice from the outside on how to deal with it. Two justices of the Supreme Court, John Paul Stevens and a wonderful gentleman from Virginia, the name will pop up 10 minutes from now. That's a reflection for the audience that I am now 91 years old and memory doesn't serve me always. At any rate, they had both worked during World War II and dealing with the product produced from Bletchley Park and from the Pacific. They understood the importance to the country's national security, and they gave me very useful advice on how to deal with the process. That led ultimately to working with Senate Select Committee. Senator Noah, Senator Goldwater gave me Senator Warren Rudman of New Hampshire, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware to work with, and we created the FISA court. Other people claim responsibility for creating it. This is how it really came about. So that NSA did not get political approval for its collection within the United States against foreign entities, but rather judicial review. I considered it an important factor internally to leave our working staff confident that our activities were clearly within US law, certainly not within the laws of many other countries who were our targets. And it was critical for our liaisons, second party, third party, for those who in the audience who don't immediately recognize it, second party, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, coming out of the World War II collaboration, and third party, those that had arisen out of the alliances created during the Cold War. So whenever I was going to make major policy changes, I was careful to make sure my second party colleagues were not surprised. And one of those early changes, I had a sense that historians needed to know what had been produced during World War II and how that had impacted conduct of military operations. So I made the decision, it was clearly within my authority, to declassify all of the purple materials and to collaborate with my GCHQ partners in declassifying as much as we could of Enigma as well. And it fundamentally changed how historians viewed many of the battles that took place, what led to their success. But I remain very conscious of the need to continue to protect sources and methods. And the FBI very much wanted me to follow up the declassification of purple with declassification of Venona. Those were the materials that had been critical in convicting the Rosenbergs of espionage in the process. I did not concede to their desire because I discovered as I examined it that the Soviets were still using that system for brand new recruits until they established their credibility. They would then move them to high-level ciphers that we couldn't read. Later years, they stopped using Venona and it was declassified, and again, proved of substantial historical value. In the effort to protect sources and methods, the issue of leaks became one of constant concern in the process. Discipline within NSA was superb, probably influenced by 18 U.S. Code 798 and enacted back in the early 30s after the publication by Mr. Yardley of his book on the Black Chamber. But as we sent the product out to users, too often people would gossip about what they'd seen or heard. And we ended up with a particularly critical situation where we were tracking activities of some members of Congress in their overseas travel, where they appeared to be accepting all kinds of favors from host governments. And that was leaked to the media. The Wall Street Journal was the first publication. They published the facts, but not that NSA was the source. 2 days later, the New York Times, unhappy that they'd been scooped, published a front page article about NSA providing the information, and within 36 hours, the country involved had changed its codes. That alarmed the Attorney General. It led to a dialogue between the Attorney General, the Secretary of Defense, and the President, and decision to tell the New York Times the damage they'd created. And Vice Admiral Inman was sent along with the General Counsel of Defense and the Assistant Secretary of Defense Public Affairs to meet with Mr. Sulzberg and his editors to lay out the damage they'd done. Mr. Sulzberger's response was if it was censorship, they would fight it every step of the way. My response was, if it was censorship, we wouldn't be there. We were trying to help them understand the damage they had done to sources and methods, which Wall Street Journal had not done, and to see was there a process that might help limit that activity. Out of it came a proposal that if there was somebody they could check with at 7:30 in the evening, would it be damaging if we say the following and get a direct answer? We took that back, another meeting of the President, Attorney General, and Secretary of Defense. Griffin Bell urged the President to try it. He agreed. Decision was to have Vice Admiral Inman be that contact. And that process continued on into the Reagan administration, passed on from Secretary Brown to Secretary Weinberger. And it really came to an end when I left government service 1 July 82. But there were many, many instances. It spread to a large number of other media outlets, editors, not reporters, where what was demonstrated, this is important to the historians in the audience, that you can get out the knowledge without damaging sources and methods if you're careful how you do it in the process. So let me stop at that point, John, and hand the podium back to you to more usefully use the remaining time we have for, if what I've had to say is relevant and of interest to the audience, what questions would they like to ask about what I've covered or what I haven't covered? I'm sorry, apologies before I hand it back to you. There's one area I didn't cover that you mentioned in your outset, and that was the relationship with President Carter. He was indeed at the outset skeptical. He'd followed what the congressional committees had said, were you spying on US citizens? About a year into his presidency, we got evidence that the Soviets were listening to his conversations with foreign leaders. Went down to tell him that, and he was not pleased. He said, Admiral, are you telling me that it would be safer if I went out and used a payphone on 17th Street? And my response was, it wouldn't be safer for your safety, but it would for your communications, because the dedicated lines you're using, Soviets have identified, and they're listening in the process. Fast forward, we got some very sensitive information on a sometimes friendly country, and I considered it so leakable that I only disseminated it by hard copy to 9 Washington area recipients. Got a call from President Carter on secure phone. It was important, useful, but damaging if it were leaked. If I could get more product, he would welcome the chance to review it. But if I did get more, he took 4 names off the distribution list. He knew who talked to the media in the process. Fast forward further, after the failure of the effort designed to rescue hostages in Iran, Desert One, he made the decision to focus his energies on negotiations to try to get the hostages out of Iran. He was going to send Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher forward to handle the negotiations. Lord Cutler, back as the General Counsel, who'd been involved back in the product produced by Enigma, he understood the importance. He'd been on the Brownell Commission staff that had ended up with President Truman creating a predecessor to NSA. So a dialogue ensued about where to position Secretary Christopher. President Carter would call me and say, I've just made the following decision, issued the directive. Was it received? Was it understood? With that kind of direct guidance, we were able to answer his questions about 85% of the time. My last conversation with him as president was when he was in a limo going down Pennsylvania Avenue to tell him that the hostages were in the airplanes, the end of the runway in Tehran, would not be permitted to take off till he was no longer president. He thanked me, asked me to leave word at Andrews Air Force Base, where he would be leaving for Georgia, so that he knew the hostages were out. I did call the VIP office. Former Secretary of State Cyrus Vance took the call. Even though he had resigned as Secretary of State over the hostage rescue operation, he came to pay his respect to President Carter, and he was the one to actually convey to him that the hostages were out of Iran. Now, over to you.
Sir, thanks. I'm really glad that you recounted that story, because in our earlier conversation, that, to me anyway, and I'm sure many of our viewers today, it's powerful, and most of us, I would argue, that can remember that. Now, maybe fewer of us can remember the impact of things like Purple, but at least the historians, obviously, we understand the importance of that, but may not have known your role in getting those stories out into the general public. So thank you again. I guess one question, and we have a few minutes left. One question that I would relay, and that is, and you touched on it with your early remarks about meeting with Marty Hellman, and that's the impact of public key cryptography, not just on obviously on NSA operations, but with everything that we do now with SMS texting and email, secure email messaging. This year we inducted, I think it was last year we inducted Dr. Whit-Diffie, and this year we inducted the 3 Brits that worked at GCHQ that were instrumental in that. It's possible that Marty Hellman will be in the queue for that honor later. But can you talk about sort of the impact of public key, both on intelligence operations and its benefit to the public in general?
John, if you go back and look at the late 1970s, the cryptography was used by government along the way. It was exceedingly rare that private sector had any interest in cryptography. They viewed it was simply would slow down their communications. When we told IBM that they were losing intellectual property through Soviet intercept of their communications, their response wasn't to go buy cryptography. It was to want to move their international communications to the cable rather than microwave, satellite, high frequency communications. So in that era, there was not an audience eager to have protection through cryptography. And the researchers were prescient in recognizing that was likely to occur. The explosion of the internet, the realization of the number of countries focused not just on government communications, but on private sector looking for intellectual property that they could appropriate and use within their own, particularly state-owned companies in the process. So the process that we dealt with then was there wasn't a customer base for cryptography. That exploded with the internet's creation and with countries suddenly, long before you got to ransomware at all, of the private sector becoming aware. Interestingly, some of the earliest users of cryptography were the drug kingpins. They were willing to spend the money for cryptography to protect their communications against potential FBI warrants to listen to their communications. But companies at that stage weren't willing to spend the money. That changed dramatically with the explosion. We had moved from high frequency to microwave to line of sight to satellite communications and then to fiber optics. And that led to not a vast surge in communications, but suddenly a recognition of the desirability, frequently the need, to have encryption to protect intellectual property and personal privacy. That didn't exist when we were doing our early negotiations. That market came later.
Sir, thanks. I think most people take it for granted now when they are ordering something off of Amazon or sending a text message or an email that there's somehow their communications are just automatically protected. But it really was the result of these pioneers from the 70s and later that enable so much of what we do today. So it's it does speak, I think, to some of the dynamic tension in the intelligence community, or NSA in particular, when we come across these developments. You know, the I guess desire to protect those sources and methods versus the responsibility to share technology at some point with the public. So any final thoughts on that while we wrap up?
May I simply expand on, while companies have gone to using secure communications, the vast use of the internet remains wide open, unprotected. If you don't believe it, just look at the ads that follow as you get online that demonstrate to you your conversations are susceptible to being and are being listened to. I ask my graduate students here at UT, 42 of them out of law, MBA, public policy, 2 years ago, when we had a great uproar about whether or not Apple should provide access to FBI for communications. I asked them what their attitude was. First, I asked them, where did they get their news? 5 or 6 by reading print, 4 or 5 listening to broadcast news, all of them going to the internet in the process for how they got their news, with no concern of whether it was valid or misinformation, deliberate disinformation. So it left me with a deep concern. I asked them about privacy of their own communications. After they thought about it for a while, they said, well, if business knew what they were doing, they didn't really worry if government knew. They just didn't want their parents to know. Over to you.
Well, as a parent of 3 myself, I can certainly sympathize with those sentiments. Sir, I want to thank you again for your time this morning. I apologize we couldn't get the video link working, but the audio was fantastic, and we really do appreciate all your insights this morning. It is a testament to your obviously very distinguished career, but in the 4 decades since that time, so many of the things that you touched in your tenure are still enduring. So again, that's a credit to you and your leadership, and we're better off for it.
It remains the best job I ever had in my adult life. So, and I learned both for our own and for the countries with whom we collaborated, that we were able to attract and retain outstanding people who found it intellectually challenging, but also that they were doing patriotic duty for their countries. So great memories. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. The historical community at large thanks you as well. And thanks again for your time this morning, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.